My name is Maximus Decimus Meridius, and I will have my vengeance in this world or the next. Okay, the hat is because I'm sporting the tomato look today with the suntan in the Alps, okay? So it's not on the beach, but in the Alps, but look, I mean, come on. So last time, Antigone, and if you've been following me so far, we spoke about the war machine that was ancient Greece and the reasons behind its dissolution. So the small size of the Greek community, the contradiction of male versus female, social roles, human law versus divine law, the rise of reason, the contradiction between the social role and individuality, because the Greek polis lacked a constitutional order, okay? So Hegel says the resolution to the impasse in Greece was Rome, and that's why my name is Maximus Decimus Meridius, commander of the legions of the north. That's where Gladiator comes in. So the book is about the journey, phenomenology about the journey of Geist, spirit, mind in general. So Hegel races through the Roman transition in this section of phenomenology, but he describes the process of, it talks about Rome in great detail in philosophy of history, and you can see the Roman world, and you can see that in on the internet, basically. It's brilliant. All the philosophy of history is wonderful. But this is what he says about this transition in this work. So, in the Greek principle, we've seen spiritual existence in its exhilaration, its cheerfulness and enjoyment. Spirit hadn't yet drawn back into abstraction. It was still involved with the natural element, the idiosyncrasy of individuals, on which account the virtues of individuals themselves become moral works of art. Helicopter. So, we look upon Greek individuals as spectacular individuals as one-offs, don't we? Fully rounded intellectual giants, physical specimens, the Olympic Games, look at all the statues, perfection, human perfection. And they were kind of role models for 18th and 19th century intellectuals, and probably still are in some ways. So Hegel then continues, and there's a lot of Hegel in this, but he's so clear in this, it's great. Abstract universal personality had not yet appeared, for spirit must first develop itself into that form of abstract universality which exercised the severe discipline over humanity now under consideration. Here in Rome, then, we find that free universality, that abstract freedom, a political constitution and power over concrete individuality, over it. Okay, so according to Hegel, Rome creates the abstract universal personality, and that's the emperor. Hegel goes on the other side, creates a personality in opposition to that universality, the inherent freedom of the abstract ego, which must be distinguished from individual idiosyncrasy, for personality constitutes the fundamental condition of legal right. It appears chiefly in the category of property, but it is indifferent to the concrete characteristics of the living spirit with which individuality is concerned. So Rome develops legal right, the legal personality or legal right manifests itself as property or private property. The development of property, which was the defining novelty of the Roman legal system, crushed the individuality of the Greek city-state. Okay, that was Rome's innovation. The legacy of Roman law is, as they say, hidden within plain sight. So David Graeber, in his book Death the First 1,000 Years, or 5,000 years I think it is, I've miswritten this, said that the German legal theorist Rudolf von Jhering, J-H-E-R-A-N-G, famously remarked that ancient Rome had conquered the world 3 times. The first through its armies, the second through its religion, and the third through its laws. He might very well have added, each time more thoroughly. Von Jhering's life work was a study of Roman law, by the way, so Roman law today is everywhere. So the Roman concept of legal personhood as a curious life of its own, extending even beyond the person. So we've got personhood without the person, so thanks to the Romans. So I'll give you an example. Mitt Romney, who's the Republican senator for Nevada, I think, but when he was the presidential candidate a few years ago, he ran against Obama, he famously replied to a heckler during the presidential run that Corporations are people, my friend. Corporations are people. And actually, he was theoretically correct. So why did Rome overcome Greece? Hegel's history of philosophy suggests that Rome's central location, with its enemies looking north and south, created a strong military state from its inception. Rome was from its very beginning of artificial and violent, not spontaneous growth. Okay, so in opposition to the Greeks. So that the first Roman community constituted itself as a predatory state. Circumstances characterize it as a predatory union with which other states wish to have no connection. It is this peculiarity in the founding of the state which must be regarded as the essential basis of the idiosyncrasy of Rome, for it directly involves the severest discipline and self-sacrifice to the grand object of the union, a state which had first to form itself and which is based on force must be held together by force. Okay, this is again all Hegel. In the first predatory period of the state, every citizen was necessarily a soldier, for the state was based on war. This burden was oppressive, since every citizen was obliged to maintain himself in the field. And here's a digression, an important one though. So Hegel thought that Rome's political character was formed at its inception, as I said, because it was a war state and a predatory state as well. So that got me thinking about the foundations of the Russian Empire. I don't know whether anyone's noticed this one, but the parallels between Rome and Russia as a war machine are there. And for example, the aftermath of the Mongol invasion seems to have created the conditions that led to a state formation that resembles a Roman model. Moscow itself describes itself as the Third Rome. So I'm not going to get into debate about the so-called Asiatic modes of production. That's not the purpose of this lecture, of this video. But Charles Halperin, in his book Russia and the Golden Horde, The Mongol Impact on Medieval Russian History, puts forward a fairly standard and convincing thesis that the Muscovite princes, the princes of Moscow, worked with the Mongol political system and adapted some of its elements to create a new type of socio-political nexus. By being allies with the Golden Horde during the first half of the 14th century, Moscow's enemies, they were able to, first half of the 14th century, what the Moscow princes were able to do, they were able to direct raids against Moscow's enemies, okay, while protecting Moscow using their alliance, okay? So they also borrowed the idea of absolute power and people are ants from the Mongols, which became the foundation of that the Muscovites needed to build their autocracy. So the Russian state as an Asian, and I don't mean that pejoratively, I just mean in relation to the Mongolian invasion, creation of course, that is, but for Russian nationalists, that's abhorrent, isn't it? We're not Asian, we're Russian, we're European. And collaboration with the Mongols is totally dismissed by modern Russian imperialists. So Russian imperialists demand a strong Russian autocracy with Russian origins, and so invented a conspiracy theory to disguise the roots of the Russian state. Halperin, this distinguished scholar, had to write a paper which attacked the Russian conspiracy theorists, such as Anatoly Fomenko. He's an intellectual who sold over 1 million books in Russia. Halperin in 2011 summarizes this widespread crackpot theory like this. He says, in Russian history, the Mongol Empire had nothing to do with the Mongols from Mongolia, but was a Russian empire whose history was erased in the 17th century and later in Russia by the pro-Western Romanov dynasty. Genghis Khan was Russian. This is, of course, according to the Russian imperialists. So, despite this is what Halperin says, despite the prima facie ludicrousness of this schema, the new chronology, as it's called, this ludicrous explanation that Genghis Khan was a fella from Moscow, right? It's a thriving enterprise. And Fomenko and his co-authors have published dozens of books in Russian and English, and the total number of pages which have appeared under Fomenko's name as author and co-author is probably over 10,000. Bizarrely, this new chronology was also supported by former world chess champion Garry Kasparov. Believe it or not, he's on Channel 4 News, you see him all the time, and Kasparov is there. You know what, we've got to use our analytic powers to work. It's just bonkers. But people who comment on stuff all the time, and Kasparov's not the worst person in the world, but it shows you how deep the roots go. So as recently in 2021, he said that the ideas contained a new chronology. You know, Batman was the leader of the Mongol horde, right? They were valuable. Okay, enough of Moscow. Back to Rome, back to Hegel. Okay, Hegel goes on. In the life of the Greeks, family love and the family tie appeared at its very commencement, and the peaceful aim of their social existence had for its necessary condition the extirpation of freebooters, both sea and land, pirates, freebooters. The founders of Rome, on the contrary, Romulus and Remus, are, according to tradition, themselves freebooters, pirates. Okay, so I think he's overdoing it because we know the Greeks, you know, were slave owners and so on, but I think he's talking about the initial stages of the state formation. So, Romulus and Remus represented from their earliest days, thrust out from the family as having grown up in a state of isolation from family affection. So Romulus and Remus, there's the famous picture of them as being suckled by a wolf mother, yeah? Like orphans cast out, okay? So we thus find family relations among the Romans not as a beautiful free relation of love and feeling. The place of confidence is usurped by the principle of severity, dependence and subordination. Marriage in its strict and formal shape bore quite the aspect of mere contract. The wife was part of the husband's property, an evidence of the degree in which the position of children was regarded as analogous to that of slaves. Again, this is all Hegel. So, again, Hegel. The immoral act of severity of the Romans in this private side of character necessarily finds its counterpart in the passive severity of their political union. So for the severity which the Romans experienced from the state, he was compensated by a severity identical in nature, which he was allowed to indulge towards his family, a servant on the one side, a despot on the other. This constitutes Roman greatness, whose peculiar characteristic was stern flexibility in the union of individuals with the state. Okay. To the constrained, non-spiritual and unfeeling intelligence of the Roman world, we owe the origin and the development of positive law. So I might move my camera angle slightly upwards. Okay, positive law. Okay, so I'll describe what positive law means in a minute. Okay, so for we saw above how in the East, relations in their very nature belonging to the sphere of outward or inward morality were made legal mandates even among the Greeks. Morality at that time was at that same time juristic right, and in that very account of the constitution was entirely dependent on morals and disposition, and had not yet a fixity of principle within it to counterbalance the mutability of men's inner life and individual subjectivity. Okay, I will try and translate this. The Romans then completed this important separation and discovered the principle of right with its external, that is, which is external, that is, not dependent on disposition and sentiment. Okay, so the Romans separated individual morality from rights through a mechanism that Hegel calls positive law. Hegel is referring not to the law in the statute, right? He's referring to statute book law. I don't mean that, statute law. Whether the law is good or not, whether it's moral or not. The Stanford Encyclopedia of Law describes positive law as legal positivism in the thesis that the existence and content of law depends on social facts and not on its merits, okay? The English jurist John Austin in the 19th century, he said this: the existence of law is one thing, its merit and demerit another. Whether it be or be not is one inquiry. Whether it be or be not conformable to an assumed standard is a different inquiry. So people have to adapt to positive law rather than law adapting to people, okay? That's positive law. So for Hegel, the positive is anything that exists irrespective whether it's rational or good or decent or not. So in Hegel's interpretation, in Hegel's metaphorical language, I might have to move this around a bit, sorry. Okay. So in Hegel's metaphorical language, the merely positive is that from which spirit has flown. In his essay on the positivity of the Christian religion, Hegel describes how the original teaching of Jesus, which Hegel sees as rational, over the course of the centuries became largely positive. That means they were put in codes written down in books by the Catholic Church and turned into something different, okay? And they lost their spirit, they lost their genuine morality, okay? Hegel goes on. The chief characteristic of Roman religion is therefore a hard, dry contemplation of certain voluntary aims which they regard as existing absolutely in their divinities, and whose accomplishments they desire of them as embodying absolute power. The Roman religion is therefore entirely prosaic, one of narrow aspirations, expediency and profit. The Romans were as essentially different from the Greeks in respect to their public games. In these, the Romans were, properly speaking, only spectators. The mimetic and theatrical representation, the dancing, foot racing and wrestling, they left to manumitted slaves, gladiators or criminals condemned to death. As the Romans were only spectators, these diversions were something foreign to them. They did not enter them with their whole souls. So they weren't athletes, were they, the Romans? The Romans were watchers and not doers, the way the Greeks were. Charles Taylor describes the Roman epoch as important for the development of individual property rights and as inhering in a person. I think I might have to go up a bit. So, however, this person was at the mercy of the state and the arbitrary whim of the emperor. Taylor says that the Roman subject placed his or her meaning or integrity in something outside himself. So, there's a lot going on here. So, overcoming the particularity of the city-state, to overcome the Greece, Athens, Corinth, Thebes, and so on, Syracuse, it depended upon the rise of conceptions of universal authority, not just city-bound. So Athena was the god of Athens, but she can't be the god of everywhere. So there had to be a new conception brought into being. Socrates, for example, believed in the universality of reason, but this placed him in conflict with the city authorities, who saw him as undermining public morals. You know, you can't undermine Athena. She's our god, of the goddess of the city. So he was undermining the legitimacy of his particular city, the city of Athens, due to his universality. The Greeks tried to create a real living city in their own image, but as the rise of Christianity in the Roman Empire saw the city as something external to them. Okay, eventually we'll have the city of heaven, the kingdom of heaven. So people, powerless on this earth, outsource their true selves into the next. So that's one of the important origins of Christianity. Turning to universal reason meant turning one's back on the parochial state. So Socrates, the rise of reason and so on, with the Greeks, that meant you turned away, but said, from Athens, Corinth, your particular gods, your particular set of idols. But this universal reason isn't embodied in public life. It is the beyond. The dissolution of the polity is the birth of the individual with universal consciousness. So the birth of the gigantic world Roman state is also the foundation of Christianity. The public institution of the polis became empty and meaningless. Universal reason helps to bring about the collapse of the city-state, but the new Roman world is ruled not by reason, but the arbitrary will of an external power called the emperor. This is the age of stoicism. You know, deal with it. Deal with it. You know, the emperor's there. What can you do? Break me leg? I've got to deal with it. So we can't do anything except about the power of a tyrant. We might as well accept I can't change anything apart from me. Okay? So, but for Hegel, Stoic philosophy isn't a solution, or rather, it doesn't provide a stable answer. Freedom and reason remain internal, while all outside is madness. So that's the Stoic philosophy all over. So, you know, you can't control everything, can you? You only control yourself. So that is, you know, 100 AD, 0 AD, not AD, beast, common era, beg your pardon. So, Stoic philosophy isn't a solution. It doesn't provide a stable answer. Freedom and reason remain internal, okay? So you've got you've got Nero and these mad emperors like Caligula. You've got all kinds of Roman orgies and excess going on. The individual and the society as a whole wants to go beyond this, to comprehend itself and what's going on in society. And the scene is set for the unhappy consciousness, which is Christianity, as I said. Roman society is the place of origin of the idea of the person. So, okay, so that's that individual defined by a series of abstract rights. I think I need to go up. So what do I mean by abstraction? I mean, it's a big word. It's used a lot in Hegel. It's used a lot by people talking about Hegel. So by the person being a bearer of abstract rights, It means rights unconnected to your social or your political role. So if I'm a Greek citizen, my rights were connected deeply with who I was. I was a male citizen, I belonged to Athens. But an abstract right means, let's just forget all of that. A Roman citizen is universal, okay? So the person is the bearer of rights as property. The modern state has its origins here, and as Graeber says, Roman law is still with us. At the same time, Christianity answers the big problem of how to make sense between the contradiction of the individual and the universal, the emperor and the citizen. Okay? This can't be resolved in the political setup of the Roman state. Instead, the unification takes place in the person of Christ. But Christianity only unifies in theory and not in the real world. Taylor says, the task of history now is to make the church community, in a sense, one with society. And this means a slow transformation of institutions and a slow making over men. Bildung, that's the German word for, I suppose, education. So that's the task of the next 18 centuries. So that's a long time, isn't it? So that's Rome, and the following 1,000 years I've done it in 20 odd minutes, okay? Nothing happened from AD 400 or so, did it? Anyway, next time we're actually going to be talking a little bit more about the concept of a person and what was going on, how people started to identify this individual personality. Hegel's talking about spirit, which means, you know, multiple minds. But how did people look at the individual mind, like, for example, the way Descartes did? So that was, next time will be a longer digression, but it's definitely worthwhile. We'll be doing John Locke, and we'll be doing theories of personality, and, you know, Peter of Abelard, and some of the medieval thoughts, what people thinking about in relation to the personality and the Holy Trinity and stuff like that. So stick around, and it won't be from the Alps. It'll be someone just as cool though. Okay, see you next time.